This is big.
Topics ranging from gun rights and private property laws to foreign property confiscation.
This case could reshape how far states can restrict your right to carry it.
It also puts state laws in jeopardy that are similar to this law.
The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Your carry permit is valid. Your background check cleared months ago. Your firearm is stored exactly according to federal transportation law. You've done everything right. Then you cross a county line and suddenly everything legal 5 miles ago is now a felony. The gun hasn't changed. The owner hasn't changed. Your intentions haven't changed, but the laws did, and you had no idea until the officer asked you to step out of the vehicle. This isn't a hypothetical scenario designed to scare you. It's happening to legal gun owners every single week across 7 specific states where the patchwork of regulations, waiting periods, and local ordinances has created what legal experts call compliance traps, situations where following the law in good faith can still result in criminal charges. These aren't necessarily the most dangerous states in America. They're the most legally complicated ones, places where even attorneys specializing in firearms law struggle to keep current on what's permissible and what's prosecutable. And for gun owners traveling, relocating, or simply trying to exercise constitutional rights, these complexities create serious risks most people never see coming until it's too late. The challenge isn't just knowing the law, it's knowing which law applies when laws change from county to county, when databases fail to update properly, when approval processes stretch for months, and when subjective standards allow officials to deny permits without clear explanation. These are the 7 states where legal complexity creates the greatest risk for gun owners trying to comply with regulations. Colorado, when county lines become legal minefields. Let's start with Colorado, because it represents something particularly troubling: how quickly a state's legal landscape can shift underneath residents who thought they understood the rules. Not long ago, Colorado was considered middle ground territory. Strong outdoor culture, established hunting traditions, relatively straightforward gun regulations that most people could understand and follow. That reputation no longer matches the reality on the ground. The shift began with a 15-round magazine capacity limit, one of the earliest implemented outside California. This wasn't just a number change, it criminalized possession of items that had been legal for decades. Then came expanded background check requirements extending beyond federal standards. Waiting periods followed, adding delays even for experienced gun owners purchasing additional firearms. A statewide red flag law allows police to seize firearms based on complaints from family members or law enforcement without criminal charges being filed first. But 2025 brought something that fundamentally changed the compliance equation: authorization for local governments to create their own firearms restrictions on top of state regulations. This creates a unique problem that didn't exist before. What's legal in one Colorado county can be criminal in the next county over. The boundaries aren't always clearly marked. The regulations aren't always published in easily accessible locations. Imagine driving from Denver to Boulder with a standard capacity magazine that's perfectly legal under state law in the first location, but prohibited by local ordinance in the second. The firearm hasn't changed. Your intent hasn't changed. Your permit status hasn't changed. But crossing invisible municipal boundaries transformed legal possession into potential prosecution. This county-by-county variation makes consistent compliance nearly impossible for anyone traveling through the state. There's no longer a single Colorado gun law that applies everywhere. There are dozens of different regulatory schemes varying by jurisdiction. Staying current on all of them exceeds what most citizens can reasonably track, especially when ordinances change with new local elections or city council votes. The result is that legal gun owners face a choice: avoid Colorado entirely, research local ordinances for every municipality they might pass through, or accept the risk that they might inadvertently violate a regulation they had no practical way of knowing existed. None of these options represent how constitutional rights should function in practice. Illinois: when the system fails, you pay the price. Illinois presents a different challenge: bureaucratic complexity that turns administrative errors into criminal liability for citizens who did everything correctly. Every gun owner in Illinois must possess a firearm owner's identification card, a state-level approval system that requires periodic renewal. The concept sounds straightforward on paper. In practice, it's become a source of serious legal jeopardy. Recent cases have involved Illinois residents arrested and charged despite submitting timely FOID card renewals. their paperwork was filed correctly, required fees were paid, background checks cleared without issues. But when police officers ran their information during traffic stops or other encounters, the state database hadn't updated their renewal status. The system lag created a gap where citizens appeared non-compliant in police databases even though they'd done everything the law requires. These weren't criminals trying to circumvent the system. They were victims of administrative delays being treated as criminal violations. The legal costs of defending these charges, even when ultimately dismissed, can run into thousands of dollars. The stress of being arrested, processed, and potentially held until the error gets corrected is substantial. And the criminal record that exists until the charges are formally dropped can affect employment, housing, and other aspects of life. The 2025 Protect Illinois Communities Act added another layer of complexity, banning numerous rifle models, magazine types, and accessories. The law requires owners to register qualifying items within specific deadlines or face criminal penalties. Miss the registration deadline because you were unsure whether your specific model variant qualified? Criminal charge. Own a part that turns out to fall under the ban despite unclear regulatory language? Criminal charge. Fail to register because you moved and didn't receive the notification mail? Still a criminal charge. The law creates dozens of new ways to inadvertently violate regulations even when actively trying to comply. And because the definitions of banned items use technical language about features and specifications, many gun owners struggle to determine whether their specific firearms fall under the restrictions without hiring legal counsel to review their collection. Illinois demonstrates what happens when bureaucratic systems become so complex that good faith compliance becomes nearly impossible, and system failures get treated as citizen violations rather than government errors. Maryland, permission required before purchase. Maryland takes yet another approach. Pre-approval of which firearm citizens can even consider purchasing. The state maintains what's called a handgun roster, a list of specific models that have been reviewed and approved for sale to civilians. If your preferred handgun isn't on that list, it's not available for purchase in Maryland regardless of its safety record, popularity in other states, or legal status under federal law. This creates particularly difficult situations for people relocating to Maryland from other states. Thousands of gun owners discover that firearms they've owned legally for years in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Florida, or other states cannot be legally purchased, transferred, or in some cases even brought into Maryland once they establish residency. The handgun that was perfectly legal across the state line becomes contraband, not because of anything inherent to the weapon's design or function, but because a government board never added it to their approved list. The roster system also means that as manufacturers discontinue older models and introduce new designs, those new designs cannot legally be sold in Maryland until they go through the approval process. This can take months or years, and some manufacturers choose not to pursue Maryland approval for models that don't have sufficient market size in that single state, effectively removing those options from Maryland residents entirely. The Firearms Safety Act of 2013 added additional requirements including fingerprinting, mandatory training certificates, and registration for every handgun purchase. These aren't one-time requirements. They apply to each separate purchase. The approval process from application to final authorization can take weeks or months, depending on local law enforcement processing times and background check backlogs. For someone who needs a firearm for home protection or personal safety, those delays could mean the difference between being prepared and being vulnerable. Maryland law doesn't provide expedited processing for individuals who can demonstrate immediate threat or time-sensitive need. Maryland also maintains some of the longest processing times for concealed carry permits in the nation. Even after the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision required states to move toward shall-issue systems rather than may-issue discretion, Maryland's implementation remains deliberately slow. Applications routinely take months to process, and denials require expensive legal challenges to overturn through the court system. California, where complexity becomes criminal. California represents perhaps the most comprehensive and layered regulatory system in America. Understanding California gun law requires tracking state statutes, attorney general regulations, Department of Justice policies, and court rulings that constantly modify how various provisions get enforced. 10-day waiting periods apply to all firearm purchases, even for people who already own multiple guns and have passed numerous background checks previously. The stated purpose is providing a cooling-off period for first-time buyers, yet the requirement applies universally regardless of the purchaser's history or circumstances. Ammunition purchases require separate background checks beyond the federal system. Every time you buy ammunition in California, you must pass another background check, creating costs, delays, and potential denials based on database errors similar to Illinois' FOID card problems. Firearms must be registered with the state, and grandfathered weapons that were legal when acquired require proof of registration before specific deadlines. Missing those registration windows converts legal ownership into criminal possession retroactively. The gun you legally owned for years becomes contraband because paperwork wasn't filed during a limited time frame you may not have known existed. California maintains its own handgun roster similar to Maryland's, restricting which models can be sold in the state, but California goes further by requiring micro-stamping technology, a system where firing pins stamp identifying information on cartridge cases. This technology doesn't exist at commercial production scale and may not be physically feasible with current metallurgy. By requiring impossible technology, California effectively froze its handgun roster. As manufacturers discontinue older approved models, the roster shrinks with almost no new additions, progressively reducing options for legal purchasers. California's registration system has experienced notable failures with serious consequences. In 2024, thousands of owners received letters from the Department of Justice claiming they possessed unregistered firearms. Many of these owners could prove their firearms were properly registered. The state database simply failed to reflect accurate information. Resolving these errors required extensive documentation, potential legal representation, and significant stress over facing potential felony charges for database failures. A separate incident involved a data breach that exposed gun owners' personal information, names, addresses, and details about their firearms to public access online. This created both privacy violations and potential safety risks by essentially publishing a map of who owns firearms and where they live. Yet the control systems that caused those breaches remained in place while affected citizens bore the consequences. Many longtime California gun owners are quietly leaving the state, citing not just the complexity of compliance, but the legitimate risk that administrative errors or database failures could result in criminal charges despite their best efforts to follow every regulation correctly. New Jersey, discretion disguised as due process. New Jersey presents another variation on restrictive systems, discretionary approval processes that technically survive Supreme Court scrutiny, but functionally achieve similar results to the systems courts declared unconstitutional. Before purchasing a handgun in New Jersey, buyers must undergo months of background checks that extend well beyond federal NICS requirements. The process includes fingerprinting, mental health record searches across multiple databases, reference checks from individuals who can vouch for your character, and final review by local police chiefs who maintain substantial discretion to deny applications based on subjective standards like justifiable need or character concerns. After the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision forced New Jersey to revise its May-issue concealed carry permit system, the state legislature responded by replacing one restriction with another. They passed sweeping bans on carrying in what they designated as sensitive places, a category that expanded to include churches, restaurants, public parks, parking lots, and even private vehicles in certain contexts. The locations are so numerous that lawful carry becomes practically impossible in most populated areas of the state. A person with a valid carry permit might technically have the right to carry, but finding locations where it's actually legal to do so becomes the challenge. Multiple civil rights organizations have filed lawsuits challenging these restrictions, and federal courts have struck down some provisions while allowing others to remain enforced pending appeal. This creates ongoing confusion where permit holders cannot confidently determine which locations remain prohibited and which restrictions have been invalidated by courts, making legal carry feel like navigating a minefield where one misstep results in felony charges. Transportation rules add another layer of complexity. New Jersey's requirements for how firearms must be transported when traveling through the state have resulted in arrests of people who believed they were following federal law regarding interstate travel with firearms. The state's interpretation of what constitutes proper transportation differs from federal standards in ways that aren't immediately obvious, creating another compliance trap for travelers. New York, rewriting the rules after losing in court. New York's response to the Bruin Supreme Court decision demonstrates how states can technically comply with constitutional requirements while implementing new restrictions that achieve functionally similar results. The Concealed Carry Improvement Act, passed after Bruin, requires applicants to provide 4 character references, undergo multiple in-person interviews, submit social media account information from the past 3 years, and receive good moral character approval from local officials who retain substantial discretion to deny without detailed explanation. The character reference requirement alone creates burden. Finding 4 people willing to formally vouch for you to law enforcement, knowing their information will be investigated as part of your application. The social media requirement raises privacy concerns about government review of political speech, personal associations, and other First Amendment protected activity as a condition for exercising Second Amendment rights. Processing times stretch for months in many jurisdictions. Some applicants face denials for reasons as vague as discretionary concern or insufficient demonstration of good moral character, standards so subjective they're nearly impossible to appeal effectively. Certain counties began retroactively revoking permits that were issued years earlier, claiming previous holders no longer meet new moral standards despite no intervening criminal activity or concerning behavior. This transforms the right to carry into what constitutional scholars call freedom by permission slip, technically available after Bruin, but practically restricted through administrative obstacles that most people cannot navigate successfully. New York's sensitive places restrictions ban carry in public transportation systems, churches, bars, theaters, playgrounds, Times Square, and numerous other locations. Federal courts have repeatedly ruled sections of these restrictions unconstitutional as overly broad, yet enforcement continues in many areas pending appeals through higher courts. This leaves permit holders in legal limbo, where activities that were legal when they left home might be criminal by the time appeals courts issue new rulings, or might be legal again if courts strike down the restrictions, but only if permit holders are willing to risk arrest to challenge enforcement. Hawaii, the island where permission never comes. Hawaii represents the most restrictive environment in the nation for gun ownership. Permit applications process slowly through systems that require personal discretion from local police chiefs with minimal oversight or standardization. Every firearm must be registered within 5 days of acquisition, and failure to meet that deadline, even by a day due to travel or administrative delays, constitutes a felony offense. After Bruin required Hawaii to implement a shall-issue concealed carry system, the state technically created one. But 3 years later, approvals remain rare, processing times stretch indefinitely, and denials continue using standards that courts in other jurisdictions have declared unconstitutional. Local police chiefs maintain substantial discretion to deny applications, and the appeals process requires expensive litigation that most applicants cannot afford. Despite clear federal court rulings establishing that discretionary may-issue systems violate the Second Amendment, Hawaii's practical implementation achieves similar results through different mechanisms: extreme delays, subjective denials, and administrative requirements so burdensome that few applicants successfully navigate the process. Hawaii remains what legal observers call a quiet model, demonstrating how to functionally restrict gun ownership without explicitly banning firearms. Simply make legal ownership so administratively complex, time-consuming, and expensive that most people cannot successfully complete the process, even when acting in good faith with full intent to comply with every requirement. These 7 states, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, California, New Jersey, New York, and Hawaii, represent the most legally complex environments for gun owners in America. The specific restrictions vary, but common threads emerge: subjective approval standards, extensive waiting periods, local variations creating compliance traps, registration requirements with harsh penalties for administrative errors, and bureaucratic processes that transform rights into privileges requiring government permission. For gun owners traveling through these states, the risks are real. What's legal in your home state may be criminal elsewhere. What's legal in one county may be prohibited in the next, and administrative errors in registration or renewal systems can result in criminal charges even when owners acted in good faith. The legal landscape continues evolving as courts review these restrictions and states implement new regulations. Staying informed about specific requirements in each jurisdiction becomes essential for anyone carrying firearms across state lines or relocating to new areas. Understanding these complexities isn't about avoiding entire states. It's about recognizing where extra caution, research, and legal consultation become necessary to avoid inadvertent violations that could result in serious criminal consequences. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.